Have you ever noticed? The kinder you are, the worse they treat you. The more you forgive, the less they apologize. The more you care, the more they pull away. Until one day, you stop. Not out of hatred, not out of revenge, but because you finally see the truth. They didn't love your heart. They loved the fact that you never asked them to hold it. You thought your kindness made you lovable, but in a world addicted to power, kindness is just opportunity. As long as you keep caring, they keep taking. But the moment you go quiet, the moment you stop explaining, stop fixing, stop sacrificing, that's when the fear begins. That's when the kind one becomes dangerous. And they'll call you cold dash, because they can no longer reach what they once controlled. They didn't love you. They loved your softness, the way you absorbed their chaos without resistance, the way you forgave without demanding repair, the way your heart stayed open, even as they handed it back bleeding. You mistook it for connection, but it was consumption. You were the safe space, the listener, the one who always understood. And they used that softness like a drug, soothing, reliable, expected, until it wasn't. Because the moment your kindness didn't serve their comfort, it became a threat. You started to notice it in the way they rolled their eyes when you spoke up, the way they twisted your generosity into weakness. You tried to set boundaries. They called you cold. You asked for respect. They said you'd changed. But the truth is, they never loved you. They loved what you gave, and only as long as you kept giving. Sigmund Freud once wrote, "People are more moral than they think, and far more immoral than they can imagine." And what you're starting to see now is how morality, empathy, compassion, warmth is only celebrated when it costs them nothing. But once your kindness required effort, they punished it. Because true empathy holds up a mirror. And people would rather shatter the mirror than face the parts of themselves your softness exposed. You thought being kind would protect you. That if you just loved harder, gave more, stayed patient, they would change. But kindness without discernment becomes currency, and the world knows how to bankrupt the kind. They took your silence as agreement, your forgiveness as permission, your help as duty. And still, you kept giving, thinking they'd see your loyalty and finally treat you right. But they didn't want to understand you. They wanted access to you. They didn't want your truth. They wanted your compliance. And the more they got it, the more invisible you became. They didn't break you with cruelty. They wore you down with expectations, with guilt, with emotional gravity that was never yours to carry. And now, you're tired. Not just tired, emptied. And still, you feel guilty for pulling back. Because part of you still believes that being kind means being available, that love means sacrifice, that softness is your identity. But that belief was taught, not born, and it's time to burn it. Because in the next section, you'll confront the moment that shattered the illusion, the realization that it was never your kindness that was the problem. It was their hunger to exploit it. You'll see how the world trains you to believe that love is earned through endurance. And how the day you finally stop caring is the day you start living. It doesn't explode, it erodes, slowly, quietly. The belief that if you were just good enough, kind enough, patient enough, they'd finally treat you with the love you gave so freely. But the day always comes, and it never looks like a storm. It looks like you smiling in a conversation and feeling nothing. It looks like a message from someone you used to crave that now makes you feel tired. It looks like silence, not because they ghosted you, but because you stopped reaching out, and in that silence, something shatters. Not your hope, not your love, your illusion. The illusion that you were ever respected for your heart. The illusion that kindness buys safety, that softness earns care. It hits you all at once, and yet you've known it for years. They didn't punish your mistakes, they punished your needs. They didn't grow distant when you changed. They grew distant when you stopped giving. And now, you see it for what it is. You weren't in relationships. You were in contracts, silent ones, unspoken. based not on mutuality, but on your willingness to give without cost. They told you kindness was strength, that empathy was healing, that love was unconditional. But they forgot to mention the price, because in reality, your kindness was being bartered, traded for attention, for proximity, for crumbs of affection that always came too late, and only when you were useful. You believed if you just kept showing up, kept loving louder, kept understanding deeper, they'd finally see you. But they saw you all along. They just didn't value what they saw, not unless it served them. You were their relief, their therapist, their cheerleader, their lifeline, but never their equal. And the moment you asked for something back, time, respect, space, truth, they recoiled. Not because you were wrong, but because you broke the contract. You stopped performing. You stopped smiling through pain. You stopped letting them pretend they were good people just because you kept being good to them. Karen Horney, who spent her life dissecting the emotional masks we wear to survive, once wrote, "The neurotic need to be liked is a distortion of the real need to be understood." You feel this now in your chest, that your kindness wasn't about connection. It was about survival. You were being good to stay safe, to feel seen, to earn what should have been freely given. But no matter how soft you were, they always found a way to make you feel like a burden. And then, something inside you stops. Not because you've become bitter, but because you've become awake. You start rereading every moment where you over-explained. Every "I'm sorry" you whispered to avoid conflict. Every time you gave your silence as a gift, hoping it would create peace. And you realize it never worked. They didn't appreciate you more when you gave more. They just took more. And that's the day you stopped trying. Not out of defeat, but out of sacred exhaustion. You stop craving their approval like oxygen. You stop needing their kindness to confirm your worth. You stop hoping that being good will save you. Because now you see the truth. Kindness without reciprocity becomes self-erasure. And you've erased yourself long enough. You no longer ask to be chosen. You choose yourself. And yes, it's painful. It burns. But it's clean. It's real. It's yours. And from that moment forward, you speak less. You explain less. You love more carefully, not because you're closed, but because you've finally realized not everyone deserves the version of you that once begged to be kept. In the next section, we'll break down how the world turns your kindness into currency, a silent emotional economy where you're expected to give, forgive, and tolerate without limit. You'll learn what happens when you stop participating in that system, and why your silence becomes more powerful than anything you could say. You were taught that kindness is virtue, that being selfless makes you good, that empathy makes you lovable, but what they didn't tell you is that in the wrong hands, kindness becomes currency, a quiet, unspoken economy. You give your time, they give convenience. You give your energy, they give tolerance. You give your heart, they give just enough attention to keep you running on fumes. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop being a person. You become a supplier, a dispenser of support, of validation, of softness. Your value isn't in who you are, it's in what you offer. And what happens the moment you stop offering? They change. The warmth disappears. The calls dry up. The compliments turn into critiques. Because you've disrupted the transaction, you were never being loved. You were being paid with illusion. Melanie Klein, who studied the emotional landscape of early development, once wrote that unconscious guilt is often the price of attachment. And you realize now, your guilt wasn't a flaw. It was a symptom. You weren't born to be a people pleaser. You were trained to fear disconnection. And the world, those who benefit from your giving, used that fear to keep you small. You see it clearly now, how you were rewarded for abandoning yourself. How you were praised for being the bigger person every time someone disrespected you. How you were told you were so strong, when what they really meant was, "Thank you for not making me face myself." Every act of self-sacrifice was applauded, not because it was noble, but because it made things easier for them. And you felt it, the quiet resentment, the ache that built inside after every yes you never meant. But kindness had become your identity, and stepping back from that role felt like betrayal, not of them, but of the version of yourself you created to survive. That's what makes this so hard. It's not just that you're withdrawing from others, it's that you're confronting how deeply you sold pieces of yourself for love. You weren't generous, you were terrified. Terrified of being called selfish, terrified of losing people who only stayed because you kept feeding them, terrified of being seen as hard or cold. But now you see the cost. You were bleeding energy, dying by softness, and they were happy to let you. But here's the truth that finally snaps the spell. Kindness has value only when it's a choice, not a requirement. And now you choose differently. You no longer pour into anyone who sees you as an endless resource. You no longer give to be kept. You give when it's true. And that shift, it changes everything. Because when the transaction ends, so does their control. You're not rude now. You're expensive. You're not cold. You're boundaried. And the people who only valued you when you were easy to access begin to vanish. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't soften the edge of your truth, and the silence that used to terrify you, now it protects you. You no longer need to be the kind one in everyone's life. You'd rather be alone than drained. You'd rather be misunderstood than manipulated. And that choice, the one you thought would make you less lovable, is the one that finally brings you back to yourself. Not the performing self, the sovereign one, the version of you who gives without guilt, who stops without shame, who speaks, walks, and rests without needing applause. In the next section, we'll explore what happens when you stop trying to please, when you let the image collapse and allow the people who only loved your compliance to walk away. Because sometimes the only way to reclaim your soul is to disappoint everyone who expected you to betray it. At first, you try to ease into it. You say no with softness, with apologies. You set a boundary, and then over-explain it. You try to protect your peace without making them uncomfortable. But it doesn't work. The moment you stop pleasing, everything shifts. The smiles fade. The energy changes. People who once called you a light suddenly say you're difficult. People who praised your patience begin calling you distant. It's jarring, not because it's cruel, but because it's revealing. It shows you that their affection was never unconditional. It was compliance-based. You stayed small, agreeable, non-threatening, and they stayed close. But the moment you become real, the moment you prioritize your truth over their comfort, they leave. Or worse, they stay and punish you. Subtle jabs, cold distance, weaponized silence. You feel it all. And for a second, you think you're doing something wrong. That maybe if you just softened a little again, they'd come back. But deep down, you know, that's the trap. Alfred Adler said, "The courage to be disliked is the foundation of psychological freedom." And now you're standing at that threshold, realizing that pleasing others was never love. It was survival. You start to look back at your own history, the way you learned to scan a room and adjust your tone, the way you suppressed needs just to avoid being too much, the way you felt guilty for simply taking up space. And it hits you. People-pleasing wasn't your nature. It was your strategy, a response to environments where love was given conditionally, where peace depended on your ability to shrink, where being agreeable was the safest path. And it worked for a while, until it started to break you, until every smile became a mask, until every "I'm fine" became a lie that poisoned you from the inside. And when you finally stopped, the collapse began, not just externally, but internally. Because now, your nervous system doesn't know how to exist without performance. It panics in peace, it twitches in stillness, it wants to run back to the role because the role was safe. But your soul, it's done. It won't go back. Not this time. You feel the grief of letting people down, but you also feel something deeper, the beginning of freedom. So you let the collapse finish. You disappoint who you need to disappoint. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop fixing situations you didn't break. You stop being the glue, the caretaker, the emotional sponge. And what happens? The noise dies down, the backlash fades, people adjust, or they vanish. And either outcome is a blessing, because now you're surrounded not by people who like you, but by those who see you. You no longer spend your days managing other people's emotions. You no longer twist yourself to keep the peace. Your presence becomes an act of honesty, not obligation. And it changes the way you breathe, the way you sit in your body, the way you move through space without guilt. You no longer fear rejection because you've finally stopped rejecting yourself. The version of you who lived to be liked has crumbled. And in that wreckage, something solid remains. You, the real you, the one who speaks with calm conviction, who says no without trembling, who chooses peace even if it makes others uncomfortable. In the next section, we'll expose the most twisted part of this story, how your empathy, the very thing that made you human, was used against you. You'll learn how manipulators weaponize softness, and how reclaiming your power means not feeling guilty for no longer bleeding on command. They always recognized your empathy before you did. Long before you understood it as a superpower, they identified it as an opening, a soft place to land, to manipulate, to take. They noticed the way you flinched when someone raised their voice, the way your body tensed when there was conflict, the way your first instinct was to soothe others, even when you were the one bleeding. They studied the way your forgiveness was automatic, how your love was unconditional, how your boundaries bent at the first sign of resistance. And then they began to test, slowly, subtly. A joke at your expense here. A guilt trip masked as concern there. An expectation that you would always understand, always be the bigger person, always listen without asking for the same. And you thought, this is what love looks like. This is how I stay safe. This is how I avoid abandonment. But what you were really learning was how to abandon yourself. First emotionally, then physically, then spiritually. All while calling it connection. Wilhelm Reich once wrote, "The emotions which we repress become muscular armor." You understand that now. You carry it in your posture, in your clenched jaw, in your exhausted lungs after another conversation where you gave too much and received nothing. The people around you were never nurturing your empathy. They were draining it, turning your kindness into an obligation and your compassion into a cage. Empathy without boundaries doesn't heal relationships. It enables dysfunction. And when you begin to see how deeply you were conditioned to perform emotional labor for others, it breaks something open inside of you. You start to recall how often you were praised for being the calm one, the sweet one, the understanding one. Not because they truly valued your heart, but because your silence made their lives easier. You were given applause for enduring, for shrinking, for not making them uncomfortable with your truth. You forgave things they never even apologized for. You swallowed resentment like medicine, and all the while, they assumed it was love. But now the fog lifts. You see how every tear you dried, every crisis you managed, every excuse you accepted wasn't evidence of intimacy. It was evidence of control. You were the emotional landfill for their chaos. You absorbed everything so they wouldn't have to feel the weight of their own actions. But once you needed something in return, basic respect, space, truth, they recoiled. Because your empathy had stopped being convenient. And that's when the narrative changed. You went from a blessing to too much, from angelic to difficult, from loyal to selfish. Not because you changed, but because you stopped performing. So now you stop completely. You stop explaining your feelings to people who weaponize your vulnerability. You stop rescuing people who created their own chaos and called it trauma. You stop apologizing for the fact that you're no longer willing to bleed just to make someone else feel whole. You redirect the empathy inward. You sit with your own sadness instead of theirs. You validate your own needs without waiting for them to agree. And suddenly, you're no longer exhausted all the time. You're no longer bracing for the next guilt trip. You're no longer flinching at every silence. Instead, you're rooted, present, clear. And to them, that feels like betrayal. Because they built a version of you they could control, and that version is gone. You don't become heartless. You become unavailable. You don't harden. You prioritize. You don't shut down. You evolve. And that's terrifying to those who only knew how to love you when you were sacrificing yourself. But for the first time, you don't care. You're not trying to prove you're still good. You're not begging to be understood. You are choosing something rarer, quieter, and more permanent, peace. And in that peace, a part of you dies, the nice one, the one who said yes through tears, the one who turned empathy into martyrdom. And what rises next isn't softer, it's sacred. In the next section, we'll witness the death of the nice one. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. Because when that version of you dies, the real one finally breathes. It doesn't feel like rage. It doesn't even feel loud. The death of the nice one happens in silence. In a pause between text messages, you no longer feel like answering. In a quiet walk home, after another conversation where you smiled too much and said too little, it begins as exhaustion, the kind you can't sleep off, the kind that lives in your bones. You feel it when someone calls you so patient, and you wonder why that sounds like a curse now. You feel it when someone tells you how easy you are to talk to, and you suddenly wonder why they never ask how you're doing. You used to light up at compliments like that. Now they make you ache, because you realize they were never describing you. They were describing how useful you were to them. And so, the nice one inside you, the one who always put others first, the one who smiled through tears, the one who apologized before they even knew what they'd done wrong, begins to fade. Not because you're becoming cold, but because you're becoming real. John Bradshaw, one of the most influential voices in emotional healing, once said, "When you live in a false self, the only thing that ever grows is shame." And the nice one you were playing was never truly you. It was a survival strategy wrapped in a smile. So you bury that version with reverence, but no regret, because that false softness wasn't kindness. It was conditioning. It was the quiet contract that said, if I'm good enough, they won't leave. It was born in childhood, fed in teenage years, and matured in adult relationships that rewarded silence, submission, and endless giving. You were taught that love means sacrifice, that being needed is the same as being seen, that loyalty means staying, even when it hurts. But now you know better. You know that being kind without limits only teaches people how to use you. You know that being available 24/7 doesn't make you loved, it makes you convenient. And so you stop. You stop being the one who always understands. You stop being the one who never complains. You stop being the one who bends, absorbs, and accommodates. You stop smiling when you're hurt. You stop saying it's okay when it isn't. You stop trying to keep the peace when the war is inside you. And for the first time, you allow yourself to be misunderstood. You allow people to think you've changed, because they're right. You have. You're not performing anymore. You're not trying to be liked. You're not carrying the emotional weight of people who refuse to carry their own. And as the nice one dies, something unexpected happens. You feel lighter. Not happy, not yet, but clear. The noise in your mind quiets. The guilt loosens its grip. You breathe differently, you walk differently, you enter rooms without scanning for who might need you, because now you ask what you need. And yes, some people fall away. They say you've become distant, cold, guarded, and maybe you have, but not because you're broken, because you're done. Done twisting yourself into something acceptable. Done lowering your standards to maintain connection. Done calling emotional labor love. You are no longer available to perform for people who only applauded your silence. You are no longer the safe space for those who created storms. You are no longer the emotional sponge for everyone else's pain. You let the nice one die, so you could live. And now, what remains is someone they don't quite know how to reach, someone they can't manipulate, someone they fear, not because you've become cruel, but because you've stopped being controllable. This is not your villain era, this is your origin story. In the final section, we'll return to the world, but not as who you were. You'll discover what it truly means to become untouchable. When your peace is no longer permissioned, your time no longer stolen, and your silence no longer guilt. At first, they don't understand what's changed. You still look the same. You still speak with calm. But your energy has shifted, and they feel it before they can name it. You're no longer responding with guilt. You're no longer reacting with apology. And what confuses them most is that you haven't become cruel. You've simply become absent. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Your presence no longer bends toward their moods. You no longer scan their tone for hidden disappointment. You no longer interpret silence as your fault, because something sacred in you has snapped, quietly, privately. After the 100th time you said, "It's okay," and it wasn't. After the 1,000th time you felt the heat rise in your chest and swallowed it back down just to preserve peace. You stopped needing to be the nice one, the open one, the good one. And now, you're just you. Unapologetic, centered, unavailable. Nathaniel Branden once wrote, "The first step toward change is awareness. The second step is acceptance." You're past both. You've moved into embodiment. You don't talk about boundaries anymore. You are the boundary. You don't discuss self-worth. You walk in it, not loudly, but with a gravity that silences rooms. You become difficult to access, not as a game, but as a result of alignment. Because now, access to you is earned, not assumed. You still care, but you don't carry. You still listen, but you don't absorb. You still feel, but you don't fold. And this difference, this refined silence, is what disturbs people who once fed off your availability. You used to give your time freely, convinced that being generous meant being good. But now, you see the currency in your presence. You see how your energy once nourished those who never reciprocated. You remember the phone calls that left you drained, the favors that became expected, the "I need yous" that were never returned. And you realize love without reciprocity isn't love. It's labor, it's extraction, it's performance. You don't owe anyone your healing. You don't owe anyone the version of you that made them feel comfortable while you drowned. So you stop showing up out of guilt. You stop responding out of obligation. You stop explaining your absence to people who never explained their neglect. And you feel, for the first time, neutral. No anger, no resentment, just done. You walk through your life without reaching back, without broadcasting your growth, without asking to be understood, because you're not looking for applause anymore. You're looking for peace, and peace has nothing to prove. And now when they reach for you, they can't find the handles they once gripped. You don't flinch when they pull away. You don't soften when they get upset. You don't chase when they leave. Your silence is no longer an invitation. It's a statement. Not "I'm hurt," not "I need you," but "This is who I am now." You become unreadable to those who only knew how to relate to your neediness. And the void you leave behind in their lives isn't filled by someone else. It echoes, because there was never another version of you. Never someone else who gave like that, loved like that, carried that much weight without asking for anything back. And now that you're gone, not physically, but energetically, they feel it in ways they can't explain. Some will call you selfish. Some will try to bait the old you. Some will wait for your return. But you won't move. Because when you become untouchable, it's not about being above anyone. It's about no longer being beneath yourself, no longer abandoning your inner world to be accepted in theirs. You still have empathy, but now it's sacred, reserved. filtered through discernment, not desperation. And when they say, "I miss who you were," you smile, because you don't. If this felt like truth you were never allowed to say out loud, then share it. Let someone else feel seen in their silence. And if you're done being used for your softness, like, subscribe, and never apologize for who you're becoming.